I swear, I'm not trying to sound like Angry Joe here, but scaling down player characters to be able to run old dungeons sounds like a simple idea. How on earth could Blizzard screw something like this up in World of Warcraft? This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Saturday, September 28th, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
I've decided to expand the whole hashtag Blizzie knows best thing to not just include the times when Blizzard has overtly thumbed their nose at their own player base, but I also want to cover the times when Blizzard covertly does so. Like when they think they're being clever, when they roll out a feature that's already an established feature in another game, and their attempts to reinvent the wheel cause World of Warcraft to end up with a version of that MMO feature that is half-cooked. I've talked about how Blizzard, in their never-ending quest to be clever in this day and age where other games are coming up with better ideas than they are, often in their narcissism ends up with World of Warcraft having a worse version of some kind of feature than competing games. And that's one of the reasons why WoW is behind the 8 ball when it comes to MMO features nowadays. But for entertainment's sake, I figured why not show some examples of this idea in action. And today we're going to be talking about what Blizzard has done with Timewalking. Their half-cooked iteration of scaling players down to allow them to run older content in the dungeons. So Timewalking is Blizzard's take on scaling for running previous dungeons in the current expansion, something that ESO, you just queue up and you get sent somewhere. It could be an original game dungeon, it could be a DLC dungeon, but it doesn't matter because the content scales everywhere you go. So, and there's enough dungeons in the game that you can cycle through all of them randomly and they don't start getting old. You might recognize a couple of them as, oh, I've already been to this one 2 or 3 times, but it's not like, for example, Heroic Mechanar in Burning Crusade, where people basically probably had nightmares about that dungeon from I gotta run Heroic Mech for this, I gotta run Heroic Mech for that, or any other dungeon that people run over and over again until they're blue in the face because of some rare piece of loot that almost never drops at something like a pre-raid best-in slot or something like that. So, Timewalking is a feature that I thought was a neat idea despite it being yet another one of those blah-blah features that isn't as good in World of Warcraft as the competing features are in other games, like I mentioned with the world scaling in ESO, or the dungeon scaling in ESO, versus what WoW offers. WoW's version of the feature is substantially more limited. It is limited to only a specific expansion, like Burning Crusade, Cataclysm, Wrath of the Lich King, as of this recording, up to Warlords of Draenor if you're level 101 or higher. And these are events that come and go. They have vendors and they have other types of gear as well that is suitable to your character's current level, even though in these dungeons you get downscaled back to a certain level that was more appropriate to the content when it was current. Or at least that's what it's supposed to do. But notice how Blizzard parades this feature about like it's some wonderful thing, even though it is more restricted than its competition. Even though the scaling people down for old dungeons is more restricted, and it's being made out to be this wonderful thing. Oh, there's this Burning Crusade Timewalking event. There's this Wrath of the Lich King Timewalking event. There's this Cataclysm Timewalking event. When in reality, Timewalking doesn't need to be anything big at all, and doesn't need to be paraded around like this revolutionary feature, because other games already have a better version of this. But this is Blizzard we're talking about. Well, as much as, in theory, Timewalking is half-cooked compared to its competition, I've been seeing since playing some BfA and trying to get some Timewalking badges on my various characters who are in the appropriate level range for the Timewalking dungeons, that Blizzard has come up short in practice as well. So I just came from a Timewalking Warlords of Draenor run in a dungeon that I remember running back when Warlords of Draenor was current content. And I, at the end of it, was told to quit the game because I suck at this one by an ants and pants DPS who far outgeared everybody else on the team. And I wish I could say that this was an isolated incident, but the majority of the time that I've tried to run Timewalking Warlords of Draenor dungeons with this queue, I answered a call to arms with one of my characters in the level range for things like tanking or healing, and wound up in a group with raid-geared 120s. Time and again and again. That represents a significant gear gulf and power gulf. So where's the scaling down? Look at the damage meter from Recount from this run, where I got chewed out by this ants and pants DPS and the healer at the end of the run when I was trying to tank it. We have an enhancement shaman, and I'm going to read these numbers off, because as some of the processing, you might not be able to read these numbers after it goes through the stuff that makes it upload quicker and stuff like that. I'm not so sure I have to do full HD for this one. Maybe I will. Who cares? But I'm going to read the numbers anyways. We have an enhancement shaman, and remember, people are supposed to be scaled down to an appropriate gear level, an appropriate power level for this old content. And yet, Blizzard's definition of appropriately scaling someone down is an enhancement shaman smoking the hell out of everybody at nearly 2350 DPS, followed by a warlock in the 1900s, a warlock in, well, just shy of 1300 DPS. As a tank, I'm doing nearly 900, and that's with heirlooms and other leveling gear at level 114, and that's what the thread is based on. Then the healer throws in some token damage, 570 DPS, which was pretty sandbaggy. I mean, if you've got a situation where you can heal the tank and everybody else without really putting much effort into it because you are so absurdly overgeared, why not do more token damage? But that's another discussion altogether. So the run began with the Ants and Pants Enhancement Shaman with the 2345 telling me, go, 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 pull, 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 when the healer hadn't even zoned in yet. And I know better from all my experience with PvE content in this and other games to not start a giant Zerg fest without the healer even being there, because stressing the healer is not a smart idea. And I know this because I've played numerous healers that have been stressed before and basically reduced to second-class status, so to speak, so I don't do that to healers. And meta-wise, we already know where this is going, because there's two schools of thought when it comes to these kinds of dungeon runs. There's the Zerg Fest, where the healer just spams, tries to keep up with the tank, and the DPS blows everything up. And then there's what I do, which is pull what's in front, blow it up. Go to the next group, blow it up. Just keep on going and going and going. If the healer has mana, you keep going, you keep pulling. You don't pull half the dungeon and then stress everybody out standing there doing waiting for them to whittle everything down with AE and the healer's going nuts. Unfortunately, because I actually had some respect for the healer, this Ants and Pants DPS kept running way ahead and pulling stuff. And so with the 2345 DPS, this was all being done on other mobs instead of what we were whittling down. So little did this bozo know that, oh, you're a slow tank. Yeah, well, you're making it even worse, because you're not helping destroy what's in front of us. Had this shaman helped AoE down what we currently had, I would have moved on to the next pack that much faster. But that's not what happened. Instead, it's, oh, ghost wolf away and almost get killed because you're at the next group of stuff, soloing it, while the two DPS and the healer and myself with my lower level of gear and you having double the item level are whittling down what we should be blowing up in the first place before moving on to the next pull. I have no problem with chain pulling. I have every problem in the world with stressing the healer out, because I pull so much the healer goes nuts and runs out of mana. Now here's the thing. I've had similar experiences as a healer in the leveling curve with a bunch of raid-geared 120s, where spamming like crazy barely inches up everybody's health because of the huge gear gulf and power gulf between the raiders and the levelers. Half of this nonsense was simply because I was undergeared compared to everybody else on the team. I was the only one there that wasn't 120. And it's not to say that I'm being too ambitious with the content, because the level range for Timewalking is one level above the original content's level range all the way up to max level. So with Warlords of Draenor, it's 101 to 120. I'm curious if level 101s going into the time-walking queues get instantly kicked by these elitists, who don't realize there is a substantial power gap that's going to affect how things go. And by the way, nobody really said anything during the run about, hey, why don't you pull more? They just said nothing, you suck, quit the game, at the end of the run. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. Ladies and gentlemen, WoW players for you. I wonder why BfA has such a small player base compared to other MMOs and WoW Classic, when these whiny entitled blah blahs are wrecking the queues like this. Don't forget, this isn't me being overly ambitious for a dungeon queue. I was in the level range for time walking, and I've seen power gulfs and gear gulfs in regular dungeon queues in previous expansions, but Blizzard, in their infinite non-wisdom, has found a way to make it even worse in time walking. Where is the scaling down when you have an Ants and Pants DPS saying you suck, doing triple the damage, and causing threat problems all over the place, and not staying with the group, and making everybody else slower in the process, because we're not just blowing up what's in front of us, then running off to the next pack. I mean, it would have been a lot faster if this bozo didn't keep running ahead, and it would have been faster, too, if the highly overgeared healer joined the damage along with everybody else. Oh, nobody needs to be healed? Let's spam some wrath and stuff like that. But that's another discussion entirely. Whiny healers who just want to stand there and wait for people to take damage, that's not how I play healers. I always play combat healers who are trying to get involved in the fight if they can, not just sitting there, you're too slow, while they're sitting there not doing their mana neutral damage, which is a recently added feature to this game to help speed the run along. Emphasis mine. But people problems aside, it's not just the WoW players that are responsible for this happening. It's Blizzard appearing to not know how their own game works. A power gulf during an expansion with the gear advancements that happen during a raid cycle and whatnot, or multiple raid cycles over the course of an expansion, is nothing new to this game. And yet, time and again, I try to take part in this time walking event as a tank or a healer, and I end up with a bunch of raid geared 120s who think I suck, simply because of the massive gear gulf and power gulf. What's so difficult about splitting off the max levels from everybody else in the Time Walker queue? Because in the case of, say, Burning Crusade, you would have these people going up against folks that were like level 81 or so. So one level above the max level for the expansion, and with the level recap and with the world scaling recaps and stuff, BC and Wrath both go to 80 now. So yeah, anybody who has played WoW for any respectable length of time knows that raid progression is another power advancement that happens within the span of an expansion. So when you have something that goes from one level above the level range for the content all the way up to max level, of course you're going to have these power chasms and gear chasms between the various folks on a team in a time walking queue. Why aren't the max level people split off from everybody else? I think it would have made everyone a lot happier if these raid geared 120s who just want to farm for time walker badges could do so all by themselves and not run the risk of somebody who's still leveling ending up in those queues. Now, you could be all elitist and say, well, if you're not max level, don't queue. But this isn't a max level queue. Time walking is one level above the level range of the content all the way up to max level. It's supposed to be an alternative to the dungeon queues for leveling through dungeons and things along those lines for whatever expansion you happen to be on. It's supposed to be an alternative. And yet, time walking, which is supposed to be a form of Blizzard catching up to its competition with WoW versus other MMOs, not only is it a half-cooked feature, but Blizzard has found a way to flub something as simple as scaling people's power down to be able to run old content and have it be somewhat of a challenge. If they can't fix this problem via their scaling setup, they need to fix it via splitting off all these 120s, because if you're raiding and you're item level 400 something, and this is totally going to be farm content for you, you don't want to see people that are still leveling. You don't want to have someone boat anchoring how fast your run is because they're not 120. But this seems to be a foreign concept at Blizzard with how they have this feature deployed. So again, you've got the feedback loop between a toxic player base and narcissistic developers. This is where the problems with modern WoW come from. And in terms of Dungeon Finder features in general, where you can queue for dungeons and stuff and get grouped up with people to run dungeons, I've been observing lately with modern WoW versus other MMOs that it's not so much that the Dungeon Finder feature is inherently good or bad, but it's a reflection of the player base with the experiences that you have when you queue for dungeons in these MMOs. I've had the best experience with Dungeon Finders in ESO, strangely enough. Better player base, better design game, better attitudes from the developers. It's an event if I get a bad group that can't handle boss mechanics or whatever in ESO through the Dungeon Finder. In both World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, I've had a lot worse of a time with random dungeon groups than I have in ESO. And considering the so-called WoW refugees are having Final Fantasy shown to them as this wonderful alternative to WoW, leave WoW and go feel at home in Final Fantasy XIV. With all that hoopla that's going on right now about, hey, stop playing WoW and start playing Final Fantasy, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that I have a lot of the same kinds of problems with the Dungeon Finder system in both games. But ESO has, by and large, given me a far better experience with dungeon queues. Guild Wars 2 as well, but I don't play as much Guild Wars 2 as I used to because of the technical issues with the game. So ESO, I think, is really the best thing to compare everything to. So it's an event if I have a bad dungeon group in ESO. Yet in World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, bad random dungeon groups are more of a regular thing. And I've also had a better experience overall with the player base in ESO versus World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. Strange coincidence, isn't it? I wonder. So, that's where I stand on this whole time-walking thing. Blizzard could have done things a lot better. Of course, the feature itself is fundamentally flawed, but what we see here is Blizzie knows best. And the result is something very half-cooked compared to its corresponding features in other, better MMO games. This is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for listening, and thanks for stopping by.